Chapter 4. Brother fights with brother, they butcher each other. Daughters and sons incestuously mix. Man is a plaything of mighty whoredoms. An axe time, sword time, shields shall be split. A wind age, a wolf age, before the world ends. The Spaewife's Song. The Dream Reader crossed the barren tracts before her cottage and studied the main street of Forsmar through cataract haze vision. 4 figures approached, too distant to discern through her aged eyes. Yet she identified her visitors without mortal sight. The woman at the lead glowed with a life aura bright as a barn fire, surely dragon rank, and therefore unmistakably Silm. Beside her walked a boy suffused by light so pale, the Dream Reader attributed the illusion to reflections of Silm's glory and her own near blindness. Behind Silm strode her bodyguard of several years, the Ronin Galanar. To believe the rumors, he'd fought 1,000 duels in the Far East without a loss, and had been lured to the north by stories of fearless pirates commanding longboats carved in dragon form. No one knew how Silm had persuaded the Kensi to her cause, but his loyalty was beyond question. The Dream Reader knew the sorceress's last companion from gossip, exchanged in the village market. The citizens named him a light elf, but even through diseased eyes, which blurred Larson to an outline, the Dream Reader found little comparison between him and the slight giggling elves who whisked through her cottage on infrequent visits. His tread was heavy as a man's, his manner cautious and careworn. As the 4 people crossed the ground before her cottage, the Dream Reader lowered her head so her hood might keep her wrinkled face in shadow. She spread her arms. Wind caught the edges of her sleeves, drawing them from wrists thin as broom handles. Affectations were unnecessary before the sorceress Silm, but the Dream Reader assumed her position from decades of habit. "Good day," called Silm a bit too loudly, as if the Dream Reader's failing vision might affect her ears as well. "Good morning, Lady Silm." The Dream Reader bobbed her head once at the sorceress, and again for Galanar. "Kensi." She waited patiently for Silm's introduction of the strangers. "Lord Alarum and Brander the—" "Apprentice," Brander interrupted in an excited squeak. "Silm's going to teach me my shave spell." Unable to discern expressions from her patron's blurred faces, the Dream Reader watched Silm's life aura for clues to her disposition. Now the edges tinged pink with annoyance. Beside high-ranked dragon school, the Reader's own aura seemed faded as the old cloak across her shoulders. "Have you come to visit an aging woman or for business?" asked the Dream Reader, hoping for the latter. It was common knowledge Silm consorted with gods. Only desperation would drive dragon rank to the lowly magics of a Dream Reader, and desperation had its price. "Business?" Silm stroked the shaft of her staff thoughtfully. "Lord Alarum has a dream for your interpretation." The Dream Reader took one step forward and peered at Larson through slitted eyes. Closer, she recognized the small frame and angularity of an elf, but his long fingers balled nervously against the side of his breeches in a gesture uncharacteristic for a creature of fairy. "I should gladly serve you, mistress." The Dream Reader stepped around Larson. "In exchange, surely you have the power to cure an old woman's affliction." She pressed forward, giving Silm the full effect of her clouded stare. Multi-hued light flickered briefly through Silm's aura. "Forgive me, lady. The spell you seek was within my power, but not part of my repertoire. I can't help you." Fearing to lose a chance at sight, the Dream Reader persisted. "A magic of your rank has disciples. Surely one of them—" She trailed to silence, awaiting the sorceress's reply. Silm's life aura shimmered and swelled as she weighed alternatives. "The cost of spells for conjugation and exchange would exceed that necessary to heal you. They would weaken me." The Dream Reader said nothing, aware Silm's need for her services could bargain better than words. "Even then," continued Silm, "I couldn't be certain the contacted wizard would agree to help you." "I ask only that you try." The Dream Reader tried to sound humble. "Nothing more." "All right, then," Silm responded in a hoarse whisper. She walked away from her companions and crouched on the frozen soil. Her life aura blazed like wind-stoked fire, then folded around her in a glimmering shield. Galanar strode forward and positioned himself before her, eyes watchful, hands tensed at his sides. A slight smile shivered across the Dream Reader's lips as she turned her attention to Larson. She shifted her shriveled hands to his shoulders. Sweat soaked through the fresh cloth of his tunic. He trembled slightly as a rising breeze flicked soft pale hair and the folds of his newly purchased silk cape against the Reader's wrists. "Concentrate on your dreams so I can locate it," she informed him gently. and try to lower your defenses. The dream reader knew her final suggestion was ineffectual routine. Only men accustomed to mental searches could withdraw defenses with any success. Thought invasion induced reflexive closure of the mind and its secrets. Anticipating a long session of relaxation techniques, the dream reader thrust her consciousness toward the elf. To her surprise, she met no resistance. Her mental probe passed effortlessly into Larson's mind, and his thought processes spread before her like the workings of a clock. It was not an elven mind. It lacked the wire-thin pathways and array of colors. It was a human mind, and badly flawed. Passages looped in blind circles or linked with unrelated thoughtways in random binds and breaks. The effect seemed not unlike the looping chaos of stuffing from a torn doll. Though curious, the dream reader avoided the strange conglomeration and focused on the faintly glowing configuration which indicated Larson's present abstraction. Exploring other avenues of thought would betray the trust of her client. The dream assumes the clarity of a play. The dream reader saw the trees of Larson's link with the forests of his then-current reality. The trunks muted to rivers, and Larson's memory of their names highlighted their importance to his vision. The titles which seemed foreign to Larson rolled through her mind like old friends. Sval the cool and Gunthra the defiant, Fjorm and loud bobbling Fimbulthul, Slil, the fearsome river of daggers and swords, Rid, Silg, Ilg, and Vid the Broad, leaped which strikes like lightning, and frozen Gaul. These were the elven rivers which cascaded through Midgard straight to Hel and the roaring cauldron of the spring Havurgamur. The dream reader of Forsmore saw the glowing form of the sword Valvetnir as the dream Larson tossed it into the tumult of the Hellspring. Hungrily, Havelgamur swallowed the offering, and the dream reader felt the relief inspired by the powerful being who had invaded Larson's thoughts and fashioned his vision. She found the misstep which caused the Dreamweaver to trigger unbidden memories of Vietnam, and the misplaced circuits which amplified them to pain and awakened Larson's screaming. Gently, the dream reader withdrew. She stepped away from her subject to face Silm and Galinar. Silm waited expectantly, her life aura dulled by effort. Within the week, expect a visit from an aged wizard of amber rank. He has agreed to lift your curse of nature. Excitement plied the dream reader like a fairy dance, but she resisted response for the sake of dignity. Bless you, mistress, she managed at length. And the elf's dream is clear. Some divine being bid him on the quest to fling his sword into the spring of hell at the tip of the deepest root of the world tree. In the silence which followed her explanation, the dream reader continued, You must realize I can only interpret the dream. I can't guess who inspired it, nor the motive behind the quest. Loki's realm is unfit for any but the dead, and a journey even to its borders unsafe for man or elf or god. Legend says any object which falls into Helvogrimer is utterly destroyed. Unless the sword contains the essence of a most unholy creature, I can't fathom why the gods would send the elf on such a task. Larson seemed about to speak, then went still. How do we find this Hellspring? Asked Silm softly. The dream reader tugged her hood against the wind. North of town find the river Zvip. Followed 7 days it widens to Silg, which will bring you, in several more days, to the valleys of darkness, which lead to the underworld. 11 rivers coalesce before the golden bridge. The dead must cross to enter hell. They join at Helvelgamer. Pity rose for the 4 companions, saddled with a quest envied by no man. Something strikes me odd about pure gods sending minions to Loki's realm. If you'll forgive the advice of an elderly woman who has experienced more than most, the Oracle of Harkatur lies less than a day trip off your course. She can tell you whether destroying the sword will serve Midgard well or ill. Silm's life aura guttered like an aging candle flame. We thank you, lady, for both direction and advice. The men muttered gracious words. Then the 4 companions turned and made their way northward along the main track of Forsmar. The dream reader watched until they passed beyond sight of her diseased eyes, and still she waited several minutes longer. Tipping back her hood, she let the breeze swirl her curled gray locks like sea foam. She loosed a single scream of joy and skipped toward her cottage for the first time since childhood. At the base of the spring Havelgamer, Loki paced before Brahman, his golden hair streaming like the mane of a lion. We must stop them, hate spawn. Stop them? Brahman's feral eyes followed his master's frantic course. We have them routed straight for hell. Certainly their mission is to destroy the sword. Abruptly, Loki ceased pacing. We have them headed straight for the Oracle of Hargater. So? So, Loki screamed above the rush of falling waters. So, the Oracle taps the knowledge of the Fates for her wisdom. So she tells Sylm and her wretched companions disposing of Valvatnir serves the cause of evil. Perhaps she even informs them of their true quest. Which is... Loki's face puckered into a frown of grim aversion. Against our purposes, hate spawn. Brahmin fingered his sword hilt, the fringe of his life aura dulled by irritation. More specifically... Loki brushed off the half-man with a wave and resumed his rambling gait. I'm a god. I've earned the right to be vague. Brahmin scowled, watching 11 rivers fuse into a cascade of white as ice. But not the right to grow impatient. That is your flaw. You told me so the first time we talked. Loki froze mid-stride. His perfect features seemed chiseled and powerful as the background of clashing waters whipped the foam. He spoke in a placid monotone. Very true, hate spawn. You've more than enough time to divert them from the Oracle, no matter the cost. Do you understand? Helblindi rasped from its sheath, sudden as a striking serpent. It grew shadow like a magnet, dulling the frigid waters and Brahmin's life aura to gray. Completely, said the hate spawn. The dream reader of Forsmar hummed a tune from her youth, as she cleaned the floor of her one-room hovel with pendulous sweeps of a broom. Her gaze flitted from the black pit of the hearth, to the rectangle of her sleeping pallet, to the spinely-legged figure of her dining table. She imagined each piece of furniture as it had appeared before cataracts blurred her world to contours. Each hollow straw, every wood grain seems to reappear in the bold relief of her memory. While the dream reader basked in the anticipation of a visit from an amber-rank mage, light flared behind her accompanied by a thunderblast which shook the foundations of her cottage. She whirled. A tall, dark male poised before her. He clutched a diamond-tipped dragon staff, and an ebony scabbard hung at his belt. A strikingly powerful life force bathed him in brilliance, its edge flaming red with anger. The dream reader read murder in the undulating shadows which wound through his aura. She gasped, Brahmin? Brahmin stepped forward. As he neared, the dream reader recognized red eyes filled with accusation, and the cruel sneer which twisted his features. Rage deepened his voice. You trifling adept, whatever galled you to meddle in my affairs? If you had contented yourself performing your paltry dream-reading abilities, and not tried to second-guess my motives, I wouldn't have to take your life. His right hand caressed the hilt of his sword. The dream reader shrank from Brahmin's threatening form. Fear destroyed all pretense of dignity. Brahmin, please stop. I don't understand. Brahmin's sword slid from its sheath. Its blade scattered highlights of his life aura from the faded fabrics of the dream reader's cloak. I fashioned the elf's dream. The visions were yours to interpret, not to advise. You sent Sylm to the Oracle of Hargater. The permanent darkness of death loomed over the gray reality of the dream reader's near blindness. She realized Impetus would lose her any chance to claim Sylm's payment, and tears blurred her vision further. Slowly, courage returns to her, lending her strength to speak against the dark elf. And I would do so again. Sylm has only done good for mankind. There was a time, Brahmin, when you and your sister shared tea in my cottage. You both begged stories of magic. And while the citizenry attacked your elven heritage, I protected you and warned them of your potential abilities. Does my loyalty gain me no mercy? Brahmin's aura blazed red hatred. He advanced. The point of Helblindi hovered at the dream reader's throat, driving her backward. You just wanted my power, he accused. You thought any kindness you showed me then would be repaid once I became dragon rank. It was your investment, a gamble. You lost. The dream reader's back struck the wall with enough force to jar her fragile frame. The sword point scratched her neck. Desperately, she thrust a mental probe to Brahmin's mind, trying to understand the mad affliction, corrupted his thoughts and incited him to demonic fury, but her consciousness met defenses solid as stone. Brahmin's foot flicked against the dream reader's knee, dropping her to the floor. Grovel, witch! All strength fled the dream reader. Gradually, panic drained to complacency, and she fixed an answering stare on Brahmin. Not for you or for anyone else, Dark One. I'm too old to fear death. Brahmin gave no verbal reply. His face puckered to a scowl. Halblindi sheared through the Dream Reader's throat. Pain wrenched a scream from her, but the half-man's laughter was the last sound she heard before the half-dead goddess Hel claimed her soul. Deep in the forest north of Forsmar, near the banks of the river Svip, Larsen repeatedly performed his only sword form for Mackenzie, who challenged him with offensive strokes of a wooden practice weapon. After 4 days of morning and evening lessons, the figures had grown as familiar to Larsen as a never-ending sequence of pine and a widening river. Yet Galinar persisted, adding only simple directional changes to the basic cut of Larsen's first session. The time spent traveling between lessons might have offered the merciless repetition of Galinar's training had Silm chosen to grace Larsen with conversation or even an encouraging smile, but she withdrew to inner contemplations, responding stiltedly to his attempts at humor when she replied at all. During Larsen's sword lessons, Silm and Brender shared breakfast or dinner. After he finished, sweat freezing on his tired limbs, Larsen was prepared for some social interaction along with his meal, but Silm would take Brender into the woods for a discourse on magic, and Larsen would have only Galinar for company. For reasons Larsen could not discover, Silm appeared to be avoiding him. I'll confront her today, Larsen decided with unwavering resolution. If I've done something to offend her, I've a right to know. As his thoughts meandered in this new direction, Valvatnir jerked suddenly. Galinar's wooden sword rattled from the blade, skimming the edge of Larsen's pants. Nice recovery, Galinar seemed pleased. Perhaps you'll learn a new form tomorrow. Larsen flushed, too modest to credit himself with a maneuver wholly attributable to a sword it had become his mission to destroy. If the Dream Reader was correct and Valvatnir housed the soul of an unholy being, it had thus far proved friendly. Larsen wondered whether the sword might lull him to confidence and betray him in real combat. Earlier, he had mentioned nothing of Valvatnir's strange powers to Galinar, since the sword rescued him from many embarrassing situations in the course of the Kenzie's teachings. Now the decision to confront Silm made him bolder. Galinar, He was interrupted by Brender, who crashed through the thin tangle of brush, face glowing with excitement. Watch this, called the boy. Larsen turned toward the child with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Brender's eyes screwed tight in concentration. His face lined like an adult's, his hand curled in a smooth gesture and shook slightly, fingers stretched toward Galinar. Shave, he said quietly. Galinar flinched back. His chin, which had sported a day's growth of stubble, was now clean as Larsen's. Brender, you did it! Screamed the elf. I did it! Panting with exertion, Brender cast his head about as if to determine which direction to run. Shave, 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 shave! As the last command burst gleefully from Brender's throat, hair sprouted from the Kenzie's chin in a stiff, unnatural beard. Galinar's face went livid. Brender loosed a strangled cry and staggered into the forest. Struck by the appearance of his customarily neat and serious swordmaster, Larsen broke into laughter. We'll continue in the morning. Galinar waved a hand stoically. Get something to eat. Glad for the freedom, Larsen wasted no time on words. He sheathed Valvatnir hurriedly and chased after Brender, hoping the boy might lead him to Silm. Eventually, he heard the sorceress's voice, loud and angry, and followed it to a clearing near camp where Silm berated her apprentice without mercy. Not a game, stupid child. The summoning of a chaos force costs nothing. It comes naturally to those born to magic. But you know that channeling its energy to a specific enchantment drains power from its caster's life aura. Your sloppy technique of partially focusing your spell is all that saved you. Had you cast that second spell correctly as I taught you... She paused. Brender quivered before her wrath like a townsman in the sights of a loaded gun. It would have destroyed you. Silm looked up as Larsen entered the clearing, and her glare made it obvious his presence was unwelcome. Without so much as a gesture of greeting, she continued her tirade. I was an idiot to think I could trust a child with power. Larsen wandered away, sick with frustration. Now, when he had finally gathered the courage to approach Silm with his feelings, she was busy with matters she considered more important. Larsen supposed hours would pass before she composed herself enough to talk, and by that time she would want to sleep. Crushed by ill luck, Larsen took a seat by the fire across from Galinar, who was scraping the last of Brender's foiled attempt at magic from his wrinkled cheeks. Larsen said nothing. He stared into flames orange as a sunset against the darkening background of nightfall. After a short silence, Galinar sheathed his dagger, pulled rations from a pack beside the horses, and crouched at Larsen's side. Apparently sensing Larsen's mood, The Kensie spoke with encouragement. You've done well. You learn as fast as any I've taught. Despite the value of Galinar's rare compliment, Larson merely watched the fire and made a noncommittal grunt. He saw little purpose in learning to wield a sword he was commissioned to destroy, and even less in journeying with a beautiful woman who would never share his love. Does the old man expect me to battle Brahmin after a week of sword training? Hungry. Galinar spread a square of cloth before the fire and emptied a small sack of dried fruit and smoked meat. Larson shared the food without tasting it. Galinar's words flowed about him, no more comprehensible than the bubblings of the river. At length, the Kensie stayed his wasted conversation and joined his companion in silence. The campfire settled as it consumed a supply of twigs. The moon rose like a chariot, a lingering token of the sun's glory, and still Larson brooded. Galinar rose. He performed a dexterous series of katas, all lost on Larson, whose thoughts centered on his own misfortunes. When the Kensie finished, he gathered bedding and spread it about the fire. He caught Larson's arm and gently tugged the elf to his feet. Rest will do you good. Larson made no protest but allowed himself to be led. He crawled between his own snug pile of furs, and though he made no attempt to sleep, he fell prey to the blissful oblivion which veils men's burdens. Larson's peace was short-lived. He awakened to the low drone of Silm's voice beside him. Fearing he might lose another chance to talk, he groped toward the sound. Larson caught Silm's leg in the darkness. She recoiled with a shriek. Magics fizzled to sparks around the sorceress, and Galinar's swords whisked from their sheaths in a defensive curl before her. You stupid elf! Shrilled Silm. You ruined my protection spell, and weakened me for nothing. By Vidar's shoe, am I surrounded by incompetence? Galinar flipped his katana and shoto to their sheaths, and retook a position at Silm's side. Excepting you, of course, Kensie, the sorceress muttered sullenly. She dropped her head, and again crafted the intricate enchantments of the circular ward, which had defended them each night since Larson first met Silm and Galinar in the forest. Humbled, Larson retreated beneath his furs, sleep now an unattainable goal. It's useless. Tears burned Larson's eyes while Silm's voice rose in incantation, followed by the crackle of intertwining magics. I can't live with her derision, not after I've held her in my arms. Flawlessly beautiful, skilled, compassionate, and strong, Silm personifies every quality a man could want in a woman. I would never have found one like her in the States, and, he reminded himself, I will never have her here. The coarse furs tickled Larson's cheek, and he brushed them aside with a self-pitying fury. I left my mother nothing but another life to mourn. As a soldier, I failed, only to be rescued from death for a task I still don't understand. I've duped Galinar with a living sword which learns his lessons better than I ever can, and Silm... Larson gritted his teeth so slightly his thoughts folded in a haze of redness. As long as I remain part of it, this quest is doomed to failure. He caught Valvetnir. With strength spawned of a boil of desperate emotion, Larson hurled a sword. It flew straight as a spear, struck the unseen enchantments of Silm's ward, and plummeted with a crash that woke every member of the party. Cursing like a longshoreman, Larson sprang from his bedding and snatched up the sword. I dropped it, he explained lamely, for the benefit of his companions, though he doubted even Brender would have believed he was practicing at night with a sheathed weapon. But no one questioned Larson as he returned to his pile of furs, and realized in a rush of self-deprecation he could not even desert the task with dignity. A voice broke his dispirited train of thought. Alarum. What? Larson responded with a growl, not wishing to talk. It occurred to him suddenly that the voice was unfamiliar, and his sinews snapped taut. Who are you? Did you say something, hero? Asked Galinar, apparently oblivious to the stranger's presence. Galinar's lack of vigilance struck Larson as odd. The Kensie was usually the wariest member of their group. Shh, hissed the first voice. Don't talk aloud. What the hell, thought Larson. Surely Galinar can hear as well as me. But the swordmaster neither moved nor spoke again. Trusting Galinar's instincts more than his own failing sanity, Larson flipped to his other side and tried to sleep. Alarum, I'm your sword. Larson's eyes flared open. Don't speak. I'm communicating through your mind. You need only think what you wish to say. Do you understand? Larson's wits exploded into confusion. He lay with heart hammering. At length, he formed a tentative reply, and concentrated on it with the intensity of a card in a magician's trick. No, and who are you? You needn't shout. The response lanced through Larson's brain. Just think normally. What the hell? I am Vidar, the silent god. Already I've sent more words to you than all my followers in the last century. From now, I answer only in images. Ask what you will." Larson gnawed a fingernail, believing his insanity well beyond question. My sword is a god. A scene unfolded in Larson's mind. Before him stood the figure of a man, blond as the citizens of Forstmar. His face was fair and creased by a smile. His clothing shimmered with an unearthly silver radiance. On his left foot, he wore a crafted sandal. On the other was an oddly cobbled boot constructed of scraps melted without seam, though the artisan made no attempt to match color. "Oh my God!" Fearing his exclamation might be some sort of blasphemy, he amended, "Sorry." Growing braver, he added, "The dream reader called you an unholy being, and if you're a god, what are you doing in my sword?" An overwhelming sense of exasperation filled Larson's head and transformed to grudging acceptance. His surface thoughts dimmed like lights before a play. Memory receded behind a presence which possessed his mind like a dream. From the perspective of the god whose image had recently occupied his thoughts, Larson marched across a meadow, marred by the footprints of giant men. Beside him strode a figure more beautiful than Silm, though decidedly male. His face was clean-shaven and shaped without flaw. His hair hung in a golden mane of ringlets. Through Vidar's perception, Larson knew the comely figure as Loki, and he watched the trickster with contempt. "Isn't it a glorious day, son of Odin?" Though clear as chimes, Loki's voice held an edge of threat. His slim hand stroked the hilt of an ebony scabbarded sword at his hip. Vidar gave no answer, nor did Loki expect one. The trickster adopted a look of suave assurance, stopped suddenly, and slid the sword from its sheath. The blade gleamed silver, then dulled to black as light fled and shadow gathered along its steel. Unafraid, Vidar frowned with impatience. He knew his life was protected by Loki's vow to Odin. The day had not yet come when one god could directly cause the death of another. Reluctantly, Vidar examined the sword and found the craftsmanship exceptional. He demonstrated his admiration emphatically, and, when Loki sheathed the blade, returned his aura to one of abhorrence for his evil companion. Loki laughed. "You like my brother and hate me. Fickle, aren't you, Silent One?" Confusion racked Odin's son. He waited for Loki's clarification. Loki scuffed his feet in the dust, eyes dancing with evil mischief. "By my magic, the soul of my brother, Helblindi, resides in this sword." Vidar replied with tangible skepticism which flared to accusation. Surely Loki's claim was ridiculous, a sacrilege from any but a deity of Asgard. Loki stepped around Vidar with the grace of a cat, his cloak shimmering with enchantments. "Do you doubt me, Lord of Silence? I can prove my abilities well enough." Vidar followed Loki's movements with forced indifference, yet curiosity glimmered faintly through his facade, and the trickster seized upon it. "I'd thought Odin's son too wise to judge without evidence." His voice assumed the recriminatory whine of a victim of injustice. "One demonstration will quell all doubt and clear my name. Would you deny me that right?" "It will take more than a display of magic to clear your evil name." Larson understood that Vidar had kept this thought to himself. The message the silent god actually sent Loki was a mixture of impatience and reluctant concession. Loki pressed his pale lips together and smiled like a child with a secret. "If you'll help gather the materials, this task will be more quickly done. While I find the many necessary components here on the world of giants, I'd appreciate it if you'd procure some items from the dwarves. I'll need an anvil and a piece of white metal more precious than gold." Before Vidar could muster protestations, Loki disappeared. To appease the sly trickster and appease his own inquisitiveness, Vidar traveled to Nidavellir, the dark home of dwarves. Time passed like a blur in Larson's mind, as if Vidar tired of the tale and condensed his adventures to outline. He watched the silent god root through the pairings of dwarven blacksmiths for a fist-sized chunk of platinum. Then Vidar hefted a half-ton anvil and tossed it carelessly across his shoulders. Returning at dusk to a world of giants, Vidar found his evil companion sitting cross-legged in the dirt, head lowered and eyes glazed in trance. Vidar dropped the anvil. Its impact tremored the meadow. Loki took no notice. Words burbled from his throat like boiling pitch. Orange light sprang to life, highlighting the Sly One in wicked splendor, a dancing radiance of hell-born power. Larson longed to shield his eyes from the glare, but he was forced to witness the scene through Vidar's eyes. Loki rose and his aura flared green. "The metal?" Vidar opened his hand, displaying his find. The platinum winked with reflected light from Loki's sorceries. The spell works, only Loki spoke gently, so as not to disturb the intricate mesh of his enchantments. If the metal is carried by one burdened with a load of 900 weight, who then becomes... Loki's aura broke to a red explosion of fire. Sparks scattered in a wild arc and sizzled to oblivion against spring greenery. Its victim. Too late, Vidar realized his danger. Metal spun from his hand as he whirled to run. Magic pounded his back like a giant's fist and sprawled him over the stolen anvil. He struck the ground. Body and soul sundered with a violent lurch. Larson felt his thoughts fold in blackness, spinning in a cyclone of Loki's fury. Oblivion strangled Vidar's scream. There remained only a nothingness beyond darkness, the visual void of the blind accompanied by the ultimate silence of the deaf. There followed a greater nothingness, a time of pure ignorance without benefit of discovery. From his prison of soundless, sightless eternity, Vidar reached for the perceptions of those who molded his new blade form and plied the fates for his destiny, but each attempt slammed him solidly against the impenetrable mental defenses of the gods and men who held him. Doomed to an existence without any contact with sentient beings, Vidar settled uncomfortably into his confinement. Claustrophobic panic nearly overwhelmed Larson's senses. Then Vidar's awareness broke free to wander, unrestrained through the mind of a future-born wielder, selected by Frey for his inability to defend against mental probes. Aside from a tangled web of guilt and fear-inspired flaws, mingled with strange words and concepts, Vidar found functioning eyes and ears and a hand he could influence while it gripped his hilt. Larson realized Vidar's window to the world was his own consciousness. Larson felt violated. Remembering that the god could read his emotions directly, he struggled to control rising resentment and concentrated on a single question. Why must I destroy you? For several seconds, Larson received no answer. The sword shifted uncomfortably in his grip as Vidar abandoned pictures for words. What makes you so certain Helgelgrimr will destroy me? The Dream Reader said... The one who called me an unholy being? Interrupted Vidar. Good point. Larson rolled to his back. Still clutching the hilt, he rested the sword across his chest and abdomen. What does happen when I toss you into Hell's Spring? Uncertainty inundated Larson. Vidar seemed irritated. How should I know? Hopefully it frees me. Only the Fates know the means to break Loki's spell, aside from the trickster himself. The next question followed naturally. So who influenced my dream? The hilt in Larson's fist went cold. That, of course, is the problem. Apparently your people lost all means of mental exchange and warfare. You can't defend against manipulation. All your thoughts are suspect. Much of Vidar's explanation meant nothing to Larson, but he had to agree with the final statement. Why, started Larson, trying to phrase the query delicately, though he guessed Vidar could read his intentions, as well as his thoughts. Why must we set you free? Reality crumbled before illusion as Vidar again took control of Larson's mind, showing him the alternate fates of the world. Vision blurred to a vast white plain, and hail stung like cinders. Larson came to realize he was seeing a monstrous winter without end, a bitter frost which slew crops and beasts without mercy. Evil seized tree rocks in a grip of ice, dropping century-old forests like stands of saplings. As Larson watched in wonder, hordes of men appeared, arrayed in armor of skins, links, or chains. Shields gleamed on their arms. Axe, sword, and spear bobbed eagerly in the hands of warriors, trembling like hounds before a hunt. Driven to madness by eternal cold, the armed men fell upon one another in a wild sea of battle without strategy, issue, or goal. Warriors dealt death to kin without remorse. Men with matching crests fell, pinioned by each other's swords. Blood geysered, staining shields and snow like wine. No! Larson bucked against Vidar's control, ripped partially free only to fall prey to his own memories. The glint of light from metal became the flash of gunfire. Warhouse transformed to the roar of mortars. The scene broke to a tide of fire, and Larson screamed inwardly. Intent on his demonstration, Vidar seized a strand of Larson's sanity and hauled his charge back to his own imaginings. The sun filled Larson's mind, a golden ball of glory shining down upon the chaos. From the sidelines, a wolf leaped upon the Daystar and caught it in fangs sharp as needles. Light crunched like bone, and bloody foam flecked the wolf's maw. The world plunged into darkness. A distant cock's crow rose above the din of battle, followed by a second and a third. In blackness, the ground quaked. The world serpent rose from its bed in the sea, and the gentle lap of surf became an all-consuming hell, battering rock to sand. Elsewhere, at the seat of the world, an enormous tree of ash moaned and shivered as a man and woman found refuge in the hollow of its trunk. Tension built like the crescendo of a song. While the men of Midgard slaughtered one another, greater armies gathered, preparing for a war which would color the heavens sunset red with the blood of giants, monsters, and gods. The battle plane of Vigrid stood ready. Giants poured to its northern shore from a ship created of human fingernails. From a second vessel, Loki leaped to shore, leading the tortured souls of Hel, who followed his commands like automatons. From the south came hordes of living flame, led by the black giant Surtur, whose sword blazed with the glory of the murdered sun. Before them all waited Loki's children, the flame-eyed wolf Fenrir, breath soured by meals made of Midgard's warriors, and the world serpent whose venom spewed as thickly as tar. A handful of gods strode forth to challenge those who sought to destroy the world. They were flanked by the ranks of Valhalla, men who had died in the glory of war and whose souls had been rescued from battlefields by Odin for this conflict. Odin commanded his troop, terrible with his magic spear and helm of gold. The sight might have driven Larson to total mindlessness, if not for Vidar's influence. Guided by the god's vision, he saw the Silent One himself poised among the defenders. With a howl of hellish fury, the wolf sprang upon Odin. The warriors of Valhalla swept forward to meet the riot of giants and the hell hordes under Loki. Sadly outnumbered, but honed to a skill which evened the odds, their swords blurred to a whirling fury that scattered limbs and spilled lives like water. Unable to turn from the violence, Larson pleaded for mercy. Despite his efforts to tear free, Vidar's nightmare visions unreeled relentlessly. The battle raged on. Odin locked in mortal combat with the wolf, whose fangs tore like daggers. Beside them, Frey faced Surtur's fire sword with only his fist for weapons. Frey capered like a dancer, but a final lunge by Surtur tore open his gut. Larson watched helplessly as his patron became the first god to die. Nearby, the world serpent vomited poison on the taut-muscled god Thor, who bruised the snake's mottled flesh with hammer blows, mighty enough to fell on an army of men. Thor crushed the serpent's skull. The god stumbled 9 steps in triumph, then collapsed, lifeless, as the venom overwhelmed him. While parrying the strokes of giants, Vidar searched for his enemy. He saw Loki's agile form dodge, then return the blows of another god. Both sprang forward in offense. Sword scraped sword and each pierced flesh. God and Hellmaster died together. Vidar broke from the throng. His cloak was stained with sweat and blood, his sword notched and dripping. As he raced to add his strength to that of his father, the wolf swallowed Odin and turned to him. The scene progressed in slow motion. Eager for vengeance, the silent god stomped his booted foot on the wolf's lower jaw. His hands caught Fenrir's muzzle and held. Vidar strained with an effort that taxed every sinew. Sweat sprang from his forehead, rolled down his cheeks like tears, and pulled on his lips. The wolf loosed a human scream. Its body gave like cloth, sprouting a river of blood which washed souls from the battle plain. The image froze as Vidar's illusion ceased, the end slapping into Larson's mind with the impact of a broken film. Through the knowledge of a god, the elf knew that Loki had been defeated. Though Surtur's fires would destroy the world, elves, dwarves, giants, and most of the gods as well, there is a strong suggestion, like that in a fairy tale, whose last sentence reads, "And they lived happily ever after," that all would ultimately be well. Somehow, Larson knew the earth would rise again, complete with heaven and hell. From the 2 humans hidden in an ashtray would spring a new generation of men in the image of a god who was the son of God. They would be the forebears of Larson's own world. Just when Larson believed the nightmare had ended, Vidar gathered his thoughts and forced him to understand what would happen if the same battle occurred with the silent god still imprisoned in his sword. Again the gods fought evil on the plain of Vigrid, but this time the elf Larson had come to know as himself stood nearby, removed from the skirmish. As before, divinities died. Loki and the god fated to kill him locked in conflict. The glowing blue sword in Larson's grip quivered with sorrow as he watched Brahman wield Halblindi to protect Loki from his would-be slayer. With Brahman's assistance, Loki endured until Fenrir swallowed Odin, but this time, Vidar, Valvatnir, the wolf slayer, shivered, imprisoned and impotent in the metal of Larson's hand. Alive because of the entrapment of Vidar's soul, Fenrir howled with wolfish laughter and leaped onto Loki's enemy. With a snap of his jaws, the wolf broke his opponent's spine, then set upon the Fire Lord's Surtur. Loki rose in triumph. At his command, chaos swirled like colored fire in a cyclone. It descended upon Vigrid, breathing new life into Loki's demon hordes. The souls of Valhalla fell prey to agonies beyond that which any being of flesh could understand. On Midgard, chaos whipped men to killing frenzy. Fathers slew sons who pleasured mothers and raped sisters. Winds smashed rotted trees and swirled oceans to ship-swallowing maelstroms. Then Brahman's shadow sword splintered the world tree, and the half-breed dragged the chosen survivors to the tortures of hell. "Stop!" Larson screamed through a haze of pain. "I've seen enough." But the Lord of Silence showed him one more thing. Waves hurled foam against a cliff where Silm crouched, protected from the hell hordes by a dwindling ring of magics. Larson watched helplessly as Brahman burst through her wards, his laughter cruel as thunder. "Now, sister, your soul is mine." He jerked the hell sword from its sheath and struck for Silm's breast. She flinched back. Horror etched her features like sculpted glass. "No!" Larson jerked away with enough force to break Vidar's control. He fell back into his own private hell. A bullet-riddled Vietnamese girl dropped to the ground screaming, her baby left to die in the field. A companion sprawled legless in the mud, babbling about returning home before medics shoveled him into a bag marked KIA. Shells screamed about Larson with the intensity of Loki's chaos. Grenades roared like Fenris. Men fell like twisted puppets, and this time it was his own hand on the trigger. Larson's fist struck the ground again and again. Why me? Why me? Why me? This time, Vidar did not answer.